Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
One group of World War II soldiers is recognized as per capita the most decorated in U.S. military history. They're the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, a segregated unit of Japanese Americans who fought valiantly in Europe to prove their loyalty despite the racism they endured at home. Out now through Tiny Fox Press, Repentance is the dramatic new novel, and I'm serious, it's dramatic. You got to read it. It's a page-turner. It's by award-winning surgeon, author Author-Andrew-Lam, and it approaches their storied history from a new and controversial angle. It's got family drama. It's got everything in it, man. It's even, you're right there in the hospital room, too. It's got a little bit of ER. You got it all. Go to the website, Author-Andrew-Lam-MD.com, and we're very excited to have Dr. Lam here on the show with us today. Welcome, Andrew. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Nancy and I are excited about this. Your book reads so fast. You're like in it, and you
really are.
You're in it with all the different characters, and you're bringing, I think, something very important to light in regards to these men who fought, and then also bringing in their story of being Japanese American, because I think there was a difference that during that time frame where, okay, there's Japanese and Japanese American, and it seemed that there was a little bit of controversy between the two on top of being Japanese in America. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. There were Japanese Issei with an I, were people who immigrated from Japan. In actuality, they were forbidden from becoming U.S. citizens, but their kids were U.S. citizens because they'd been born in the U.S. They were Nisei with an N. And the 442nd was this heroic group of Japanese American Nisei who had endured a lot of racism and prejudice. In the West Coast, of course, they had been interned in camps like Manzanar. And the 442nd had groups, volunteers from Hawaii and from the mainland camps, and they basically fought with amazing valor because they wanted to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they were loyal Americans, to prove to everybody that they were just as deserving of dignity as any American. And so they fought with amazing valor in Italy and France and became the most decorated unit in history, in U.S. military history. So it's an amazing story.
It really is. And in your book, you've got Daniel, who is a world-famous cardiac surgeon. So it starts with him, and it hauls fast. And yet he's, someone who's really worked hard in his life to get where he is. Yet it seems like in the story, it's like starting to crumble around him. You're like, no, no.
Right. So absolutely. Authors write best about what they know, right? So I love military history. I studied it. I got my degree in it before I went to medical school and became an eye surgeon. So I know about medicine, and that's kind of part of the reason why Daniel Tokunaga, who is the son of this Japanese-American war hero in the book, is a cardiac surgeon. So that way I can kind of, describe all the amazing cool stuff that we saw in medical school and in training, and describe what it's like as a surgeon. And then, of course, I know what it's like to have a family. I've got 4 kids. And go through that intense surgical training. So I think you hit on that. There's definitely kind of this medical part of the book, the war drama, and the World War II history as well.
And family and love, the stories of passion. I mean, everyone's a very passionate person in their own way and with different passions. And this isn't your first book either. You've also written Saving Sight and also Two Sons of China. It's also a World War II story. So you're into that story. And I think, Nancy, when you think about going back to the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, at that time, off they go. They're out fighting, yet a lot of them and their families were still in Manzanar or came from Manzanar. And you think about that time frame. Today, where we're talking with you, we're actually based today in Yuma, Arizona. It's our tour headquarters for our Love Your Parks tour. We're traveling to parks across the country. We're right by the border, and we're right next to Imperial County or Imperial Valley, where a major, major agricultural hub, but really point because of the Japanese that lived there. But there were internment camps here. There were internment
in Arizona.
Camps all the way up, all the way up out here.
Yeah.
So,
I know my mom
there were
told
10
me
internment
that
camps. Wow.
Yeah, when my mom was in school, she told me that when she was in school one day, she had Japanese friends, and one day people came in, and I'm not really sure if it was military or police or who, came in and took all Japanese kids out of school, and they never saw them again.
Oh, wow. She
they
remembered
just took
that.
Them, yeah, and they took them all to the internment camp.
And I think that's something you talk about really well in Repentance, is just how, like, suddenly you have a house, you have a family, you're working on a small business, and all of a sudden you're just
you lose
uprooted and you lose everything you work so hard for.
Yep.
Yeah, we can't forget our history. That's exactly why, it's so important to remember what happened. When we get fearful, then it's very easy for us to scapegoat people who look like the other, quote unquote. And that's something we need to make sure we never forget what happened. I think that it's clear that Japanese internment was definitely a national tragedy. Our country has apologized for it, and we know that it was wrong. But we've got to prevent history from repeating itself.
Well, I think your book is timely.
It's very timely.
I'm just saying, it feels
right
on the edge of of a big wake up. Because people do things to people, and history shows like how bad we are as human beings. And then there's also all
human
the
nature doesn't
positive
really change,
stories.
does it?
There's positive
That's right.
stories too.
It's
just
racism is just such a big sign of insecurity. It really is. So when people start to act in a racist manner, then you know that they really, for whatever reason, they're scared. Yeah, they feel threatened. They're scared. And I think fear makes people not act like humans. Sometimes.
Well, look at
that's true.
Daniel's dad in the book, who did fight, with the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. That's a mouthful to say, but he really was a very introverted human being. So was his son Daniel, but had that same. There's so many people that come back from war, and different wars, whether Vietnam, and that came into the book too.
That's right.
The story that was actually huge part of what it is.
Right. I mean, this book, the whole point of the book is basically it's a story about this Japanese American war hero, but he's got a really big secret, and this is the father you're alluding to. And the secret is so bad and so entwined with kind of the combat that made him a hero that he's afraid of letting anybody ever know about it. But what happens is the son, who's Daniel, the cardiac surgeon, as you were mentioning, who actually has a very strange and a distant relationship with his father. They haven't spoken in decades. Daniel starts to find out that the government is coming to ask questions about the details of this war medal his father won. And his father seems very reluctant to talk about it. And it starts the son on this journey of discovery, takes him to California, over to France where the fighting occurred. And he starts to unravel secret after secret about his parents and his family. And it totally turns their world upside down. And, of course, that's all entwined with the story of internment and the 442nd. So, you pretty much hit on it.
And to go from fighting and then his son going, hey, I want to protest Vietnam. Now that's a almost like a slap in the face in a way.
Well, to a family that really values honor, as many Asian cultures do, of course, and education, because can you imagine this generation that fought in World War II after surviving the Depression and the economic turbulence of that time, has kids in the 60s who basically go to college and start protesting against the country that they're supposed to respect and love, right? And they're supposed to be getting an education, right? So I don't think it was a unique story necessarily, like the parents who sent their kids and then their kids became protesters for the Vietnam War. Now, of course, there's obviously a lot of validity to protesting the Vietnam War as well, but that aspect of the story was also, I think, something that a lot of people of that generation might be able to resonate. It might resonate with them.
And
for sure.
And it's also looking at, he came back over to, the son, Daniel, came back over to California, to L.A., and his dad went off with a friend up through the Central Valley region and going where Manzanar is today, which is a unit within the National Park Service. It's,
That's right.
Three quarters of our national park units are historical. And this area, I encourage people to go. It is, it's on the east side of Yosemite, on the west side of Death Valley. So it's in this interesting strip of desert, and it gets really hot and it gets freezing. And when you think about where they were just placed in this, we didn't get to go as far in and around as we wanted to in Manzanar when we were there, because we just kind of drove in, and you just get this feeling of like, how do you just dump people off in the desert?
That's right.
And looking at it, a friend of ours just went there recently and was showing photos and all the plaques and the signs, and it looked like they just turned around and said, okay, that's it. We're growing gardens. We're going to get our family back on their feet, and worked like a major village to just really resilient people.
Right. And exactly right. There's just something about Japanese culture that's so resilient and strong, and it's very impressive. But you're right. Manzanar, ironically, these 10 internment camps were all in very desolate places. In fact, a lot of states didn't want them to have camps in their state. There was a big fight about that. Manzanar is on the eastern slope of the Sierra Nevada, and it's actually quite beautiful in a stark way. But actually, many of the camps were in not at all scenic places, even worse. Like in Arkansas, there were camps Jerome and Rower, which were basically built on reclaimed swampland. In Arizona, Poston and Gila River. I mean, there was nothing to recommend these places. And yet, you're right, they made lives for themselves in these places: schools, hospitals, agriculture, clubs, and of course the boys who volunteered for the 442nd out of the camps.
Wow. I know they were young, and they didn't really know what. It's like next thing you know, you're in France, and in Italy, and you're like, what the heck am I doing here? And it's like, oh, you trained for this, and you're like, what? What did I train? What did I do? And then you go on.
I think that's
everything.
probably. That's right. I mean, any boy who goes overseas, at first I'm sure it's very exciting and you want to be patriotic. But then when it comes down to it, you're really motivated by, your friendship with the brothers that you have, and you don't want to be the guy who lets down everybody else, essentially. And this unit cohesion they had was really, really great. I mean, even though, to be honest, the 442nd was made up of two very different groups. There were the Hawaiians, who were actually 2/3 of the men, and the mainlanders. And the Hawaiians, they hadn't been interned. They had experienced bigotry, but they were enthusiastically volunteering because they really wanted to prove themselves. The mainlanders were more sullen. They had everything taken from them, as you said, their homes, their businesses, their parents were incarcerated. And so the groups actually, at first, this is a very interesting story. At first, they didn't get along. There were fights and things like that. The Hawaiians kind of went around in packs and kind of pounded anyone who wasn't one of their brothers. And they had a lot of money, actually, because they'd had a lot of big aloha send-off with aunties and uncles had given them money, whereas the boys from the internment camps had very little money, and any money they had, they'd actually send back to their parents. And so actually one commander had a really good idea, because they were training in Mississippi, and they said, let's take the Hawaiian boys over to Arkansas to one of these camps like Rower and Jerome and have a dance. And so they took these Hawaiian boys, and when they saw the camps, the boys were just shocked. They saw the barbed wire, the watchtowers with the guns pointed in, the very austere conditions. I mean, these camps had bathrooms, communal bathrooms with no partitions between them. There's lined up toilets, essentially. In Manzanar, they recreated one of these, I believe, and you can just see, and it's not very hard to appreciate how undignified it would be to use a facility like that. And when the Hawaiians saw that, they realized what the other boys from the mainland had volunteered from, and it completely changed their attitude, a complete 180. And when they got back to Mississippi, they were a very strong unit together, and they were much more understanding of each other.
See, that's that, and it is education, It's that, and it goes right back to racism and bigotry and things like that. Is really about fear of the unknown. And, Hawaii is a really interesting place, too. How that became a state, that was just a swoop in and steal as well. I'm just saying.
You mean when the U.S. stole it as a territory?
Yeah, it was. It's a swoop in.
Well,
that's business interest
and
that
Dole,
took the
Mr.
territory.
Dole and his big pineapple, and, I'm going to come in and take the,
Took over Iolani Palace. But the 442nd,
right?
actually, I thought you were actually going to allude to the statehood. In 1959, when they became a state, the legacy of the 442nd was actually very instrumental in helping Hawaii become a state. Some in Congress looked to that as a role, as a example of Japanese American patriotism, and it really, I think, helped the votes to gain the votes to allow Hawaii to become a state. So this was very far-reaching. Like the story of the 442nd is very important, especially to Asian Americans in Hawaii.
Wow, it's really, to me, it's I just, the way you tell the story, you make it very personal. So, someone who may not be familiar with World War II history, or Japanese history, right? It just gets right under you because it's a personal story, and you start to understand what people went through. And I think that's a really good talent that you have, is very connected to the characters. And it's interesting how you write about Beth. How you write her
role. This is the wife
of
the cardiac surgeon.
Yeah, because you can tell. I'm sorry, I'm in it right now.
Okay, great.
But to write from a woman's perspective, which you do, did you take this to your wife and say, hey, check this out? Am I doing this
Well,
right?
I do have to explain sometimes that it's fictional, and but yes, I mean, I think that it's always a challenge to write from the opposite gender's perspective. But at the same time, I as I mentioned, I like any surgical resident who's done training, they know it's very demanding. They know there are demands on families, and that's kind of the angle I was able to, I think, approach this story from in a very genuine way. Because marriage is already a miracle. Successful marriages are a miracle alone, but when you have a career where basically you could be called in for an emergency, or your life is not your own because you're basically, in this case, you're a surgeon who essentially is like saving lives or dealing with trauma victims and things, it's very difficult, right? And it's difficult for a spouse, whether it's a husband or a wife. If their spouse is a surgeon, it becomes challenging, right? Because it's hard for regular everyday life, which is very important, to ever kind of hold a candle to or compete with what's considered life and death,
right,
in the hospital,
right,
essentially.
Yeah, and there's a balance of
that boom.
where
I just
your
want
head
to mention.
goes. Go ahead.
If you just heard a boom, there's like a Civil War reenactment happening outside in our neighborhood in Massachusetts.
Oh, nice.
It's
Did
pretty
you
cool.
hear the sirens go by?
Every hour they boom it.
We got sirens over here, so if you need help, send them
like
over.
No, we're good.
Corner from the hospital and the police department.
Yeah, and the fire department, which I like. I like the fire department.
They're all right here, so we hear them.
Yeah, we hear them, and I look at them. But there it is. There it is. But it is interesting to me also, that balance of there's that balance of you're helping and you're saving lives, and Daniel goes through that, and then it's how to balance that with humility, and he has that going back and forth. And I think that's an interesting part too for people to read and learn. What was it for you that said, okay, I'm into this, I'm into history, got my degree in it, but what was it that said, hey, I'm going to write novels and I'm going to tell these stories? That led you to that?
So my story is that I grew up in Central Illinois, and I loved history. I knew I would study military history in college at Yale, but my dad was a physician. He was a cardiologist, and it wasn't really unusual, to be honest, in my hometown for strangers to stop me and my family on the street or in the mall, get down on one knee at my level and say, "Oh, your dad saved my life or my mom's life. Are you going to be a great doctor like your dad?" And when that happens like 3 or 4 times a month, literally, it makes a pretty indelible mark on you as a kid, and you realize, wow, like medical school, being a physician could be really fulfilling. And that's probably why I kind of knew going into college that medical school for me would be a route that I would want to take. But and that was great, and I love what I do as a retina surgeon. But I never lost this love of history and my desire to convey it to people. I think if I wasn't a physician, I'd probably almost definitely be a history teacher because I'm so passionate about it. And so I'm sitting there one night in the ER. It's like 2 a.m. The flow of patients has died down, but I can't leave. And I start kind of daydreaming about, wow, how could I convey this history that I learned in college about America's war in China during World War II, because that's kind of what I studied. And a lot of people don't know, like tens of thousands of Americans served in China, fighting the Japanese, helping the nationalists, and even meeting with the communists before they took over the country. And I said, well, what if I came up with this romantic, epic war novel and got people interested in this, who would love the story, to pick up the book, but it's a way of conveying the history that I'm so passionate about to them. Maybe even reach people who don't even think they like history, but because they're entertained, then they learn the history. And that's what I did with my first novel, Two Sons of China. And that's kind of what I'm doing with Repentance as well.
Yeah, you definitely do. It's interesting too, and you're telling stories that people may not know right now today, and understanding what it's like for people to come back from war, because it's part of you once you've gone there, and that's with any war. So I think I'm glad you put that part in there. And it's interesting because we watched having gone through Central California a lot in the Central Valley region. It was always interesting to me. It's like, here's this internment camp Manzanar over the mountain, but then in the valley area, we've been on farms where they had watchtowers in the middle of orange groves. And I remember this farmer going, that's where we would stand up and watch, for the Japanese. And I'm like, what do you mean?
Oh,
You're in the middle of a farm.
Yeah,
that's what
That's right.
They have watchtowers all throughout the San Joaquin Valley region and everything.
Really?
And I'm like, what are you doing? And I thought this was a coastal thing. I didn't know what was going on.
Right.
And he's like, no, as kids, they would take shifts and they would help with what was going on. And then when we got even further up in more like Tulare County, were the Hmong people. And that was, and people didn't know anything. And we just now, Kamal Bell, on his program, has a TV show, United Shades of America, finally showcased who the Hmong people were and how they lost their country. And I didn't know they were out in Minnesota at all. I didn't know that was where it's like Hmong Central, but Central Valley, they have huge communities, and they've kind of gone off on their own, and now I understand more. And I thought, between your book and what that show did, I think it's important to show these stories, because that's parts of the wars. These little parts of the war are really a huge deal, but they don't tell, and I don't think it's people want to know. Well, I think that not that people don't want to know. I think that a lot of things were hidden.
Well, it's definitely not taught in history classes in school.
Not as much now.
At least not when I was in school.
I think that's changing. I'm glad that it's changing, actually. I mean, there's a lot more diversity being taught in history classes, as I've seen in the places I've frequented lately. But you're right. When I was a kid, they didn't talk much about Japanese internment or other races and what happened to them. It's one interesting thing. You'll like this, because we just passed the 150th anniversary of the Golden Spike. When they joined they made the Transcontinental Railroad, and a huge part of this year's celebration, I think it was May 10th of this month, was that the Chinese had been basically written out of history. Like 90% of the workforce on the western side was Chinese. And 50 years ago, actually, when they had the 100th anniversary celebration, there was one Chinese descendant who was supposed to speak, and he was, at the last second, taken off the program. So there was basically no acknowledgement that 90% of the workforce on the western side was Chinese. So this year, they rectified that dramatically. There was a lion dance, and this just happened last week. Elaine Chao, who is Asian American Cabinet Secretary of Labor, I believe, was there giving a speech. So, times have changed, and will continue to. Because our history is so rich, and there's so many stories yet to be told.
Exactly. When we were in Prescott, Arizona, and it's true, when you look at the history of who really, the westward expansion, who did the work, take a good look, America.
Irish.
Because it's
They were immigrants from Ireland and China.
Yep.
A lot of them.
And out here in the West, you see it. And we were in Prescott, Arizona about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And we were sitting in this Irish pub, of all places. And it was one of the pubs there.
Yes,
it's on Whiskey Row. So it's a happy place, and every time we go there, we end up having to spend the night. I'm not saying any more than that. But we were in this historic bar, sitting up, and this guy was dressed. He was the Renaissance man, and they called him that. And he was dressed up, like back in the Western days, like Doc Holliday, Wyatt Earp style. And he was talking about the history, and he said when they were they were doing all this construction work under the bar area where we were, and he said that he found, with this construction company going in, they found remnants of Chinese workers being in there, opium. They had found opium bottles.
Really?
And that they found how this was a restaurant and like a brothel restaurant thing at top where we were sitting, and that there were pulleys for food going down to the Chinese workers, and that nobody knew they were there. And here he is with all the evidence, right? They go and show it, and the big museum there, now I'm going to get in trouble, but it's true, the big museum ignored it and would not acknowledge that the Chinese were there, and we don't know if they were really getting paid or if they were slaves.
They called them coolies.
Yes, that's what they said.
And I don't believe they were fed, but they were not paid.
Exactly. I think there was like a slave thing going on back in the day.
Wow.
Man.
Wow.
They had to work on the railroad.
Wow, it's hard to imagine.
Yeah, and so there's still this faction of even museums not being aware. You know, we need to delve in to say if that's true or not, but that's what happened that day in that saloon, and then we never went home. but it was really interesting because I think that as people learn more and more, I mean, it was in Tombstone, Arizona. There was one lady's museum. She has the largest rose bush in the world, the Lady Shade. Largest 9,000 feet wide, no kidding.
Yeah.
Tall,
crazy. It's 100 years old or something.
Yeah, and she went in and looked at what happened in history and went and did the truth and wrote the truth and went, hello, everybody. And she opened a museum because they were also hiding that, and yet the Chinese were in Tombstone, and they had all the implements and everything. She made sure that they had their own display. So there's good people there too. So I'm just saying.
Of course.
Yeah. Wow. So what are you writing about?
So what place are you going to next in your travels? Which national park are you going to hit next?
Well, we are going to Santa Fe. We're going to go do Bandelier National Monument.
Oh, great.
We are going to Gallup, New Mexico, so we can go to Chaco culture.
Yes, that's
going to
be great.
We're going to hopefully go to Rocky Mountain National Park.
Yay.
Hopefully. We're going to Pawnee National Grasslands in Colorado. Probably go back to the Gila Cliff Dwellings and come back here. And then we go to Springfield, Kentucky, and Natchitoches in Louisiana.
Well, you're really covering a lot of ground.
Yeah, and East Tennessee, the Smoky Mountains. And then we come back.
That's the most popular one in the system. Great.
Exactly. So, but you're in Massachusetts, so I know that
there's some good ones up here.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, you've got rich history there. I mean, for sure. I want to go stand where they did the Boston Tea Party and threw the tea overboard.
Yes.
I want to go there.
Well, that's not in the national park system, but they actually did recreate. They have now a tourist attraction that's recreating that, and people actually just throw these boxes over the side. But yeah, I mean, there's so much history in Boston. You know, there's Lexington and Concord, there's Faneuil Hall, there's the Freedom Trail through the city, Old North Church. John Adams National Historic Site is one of my favorites. Out where I live in Western Mass, there's the Springfield Armory National Historic Site, which is where they basically invented and produced all the U.S. military weapons from the Revolutionary War to Vietnam. At the beginning of the Revolution, they wanted to make two armories, one in the north, one in the southern, more south. So they did Springfield Armory and they did Harper's Ferry, and those were the two original armories for the federal government.
Wow. Wow. Interesting. So how many parks have you been to? Because I know you have a park passport book like we do.
Yes, I do. And I've probably hit the low-hanging fruit. I'm close to half. But I basically filled up all of New England and the Mid-Atlantic states because I did my medical training in Philadelphia. So I pretty much got all those. And as you know, there's a lot of historical ones that are close together. I've been to I'd say I've been to almost all the major of the national parks. But there's so many great ones, like the Midwest, the Central West. You need to really dedicate yourself, as you guys are doing, to go to basically drive around. And I have 4 young kids, so it's a little bit challenging to do that.
But it's good for them. It's good for them to experience the history, you know.
But these days, kids have so many. They're so overscheduled with so many activities and stuff. It's hard to get a family vacation in there sometimes. It's crazy.
Wow, that's what's happening to kids now. Yeah.
It is.
And then you got to take the phone away. Hey, listen, I have to ask this. Do you think phones hurt our eyes?
Yeah, no, I don't think that's been proven.
Okay.
I don't think that's been proven.
Okay.
Now there's others. Yeah, from a visual standpoint, it's okay. Any other medical questions?
No.
Good.
Do,
See your eye
do
doctor
we
once
stare
a
at
year.
the sun, the
advice.
eclipse? No, maybe not.
Definitely
but
don't stare at the eclipse.
Where I was going to say, what is your next book? Because we want more.
Yeah, great question. I learned after my first book that I don't really, I shouldn't talk too much about my next book, because what that does is it creates a lot of expectations, like and then you never know, these things take so long. Like, you never know when it's going to come out. And I made that mistake maybe 6 years ago, because I gave an interview, and in an interview I talked about repentance, actually. And for the last 6 or 7 years, my patients have been asking me, when is Repentance coming out? And it was, it had to be rewritten multiple times, and my agent and then my editor changed it up. And so I will keep that close to the vest, but I'm definitely thinking of some stuff. Thank you.
Okay, good.
There's a lot of history yet to be explored.
We want more, yeah.
Yeah,
and,
as long as we know another's
I have to ask you this question, because you go to parks like we do, and I want to give a shout out to JKS Communications, because they have sent us on a story mission across the country on our Love Your Parks tour to go and share literary stories as we go. And so we're going to be doing that in Santa Fe. There's like a whole literary tour, so that's coming. Ladies over there. But anyway, I wanted to ask you. One thing we learned on our tours is going into the parks, that a lot of people think that you have to be like a super athlete to go into Yosemite or Sequoias and places like that.
Oh, yeah, not at all.
And not at all. So we created a Facebook group called 1 Hour Walk to really promote the health of walking and just taking a simple walk, whether it's in your neighborhood, a downtown, whatever it is, to get outside and be observant and all that good stuff. So my question to you today is, if you could take a 1 hour walk in any park in the world, one that you've either been to or not, which one would you go to? And you can take 3 people with you, alive or passed on or even fictional, since you're an author. Who would you take with you?
Yeah, well, I definitely
walk?
Probably choose Yosemite. Either go to Glacier Point.
Oh, yeah.
Probably, because that's a little less crowded than in the valley sometimes. But obviously the crowds, finding a time when there weren't as many crowds would be great,
Winter.
Yeah, as far as people, winter, sure. I mean, it's God's country. It's just amazing. And then, your other question was, who would I bring, living or dead? 3
or
people?
Fictional.
Or fictional. Jeez.
Yeah. Ooh.
That's a tough one. So on one level, there'd be the personal, right? Like, I would, 2 of my grandparents I never met, for example, my mother's parents, and or maybe one of them passed away right after I'd been born. But basically, this generation, my mother's parents sacrificed a lot to come to the United States. They were from China. Then when the communists took over China, they had to flee as refugees to Hong Kong. They lost everything. And then they sacrificed again to bring their family to America. And so just appreciating that, I just appreciate our family history a lot. That would be meaningful to me. Any historical figure, obviously, from Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, would be amazing, of course. And, I think that the list could be endless. It'd be impossible to pick 3, to be honest. How about you? I'm sure you've answered this question yourself.
Oh, well, thanks. Right back at you, right?
I think I would give me a good idea.
Yosemite is cool. The Glacier Point is cool. We went there in winter, and sometimes they close that road, but we were lucky to see it.
Yes.
But taking a walk at this point, with the conversation we had, I would like to take. I think you should come with us to Manzanar, and we should go for a walk through Manzanar.
That would be fabulous.
And
that would be fabulous.
I'd like to have Kamal Bell go, because he's doing so much to show these stories too. To share this and to unite. So I'd like to take him, and he's funny. Nancy?
I want to go to Yellowstone again.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I
want to
What's your favorite
there.
part of Yellowstone?
Oh, gosh. There's so
the
much
falls
of it.
Or the
I just really
geological
like
stuff?
I like to watch the animals. That's my big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see elk there and buffalo.
I want to see moose.
Moose, yeah, I mean,
mountain goats.
And there's so many. It's like the landscape changes so much within the park that it's
that's an incredible
it's different.
spot.
Are you still taking David Attenborough? Because that's her thing. She wants David Attenborough.
Oh, great. Okay.
Just so she
That'll
can
be a
do
good
the
one.
voice. That'd be cool.
Yes.
Well, listen,
He can narrate
we have
behind
a song.
me.
We have a song for you. It's called Captain America, and it's from Nikki Chris's new album, and it's Nickikris. I have to spell that out. But Nikki Chris, her latest album is Heartbeat. So I have to play that since, we're talking about cardiac surgeons. But Captain America, sure. It's about being your own superhero and going out there and doing things. And I think being able to balance all that you do, you got to be a superhero, dude. You're rocking it. You're rocking the book world and obviously in the medical world as well. So thank you for writing really good books. Everyone, again, Repentance by Dr. Andrew Lam. You can go to his website, AndrewLam-MD.com, and also learn more about Two Sons of China, his other novel, and also Saving Sight. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you when we get to Massachusetts. We'll go
Sounds
to the
good.
armory thing and blow things up. Not really.
Yeah, you'll enjoy that one.
All right. Here it is, everyone. Captain America. Take care.
See the boy turn quickly into a man, wants to do what's right, the best that he can.